Imagine a ruined metropolis, scarred by war, where 2.5 million people suddenly wake up trapped. No coal to heat their homes. No electricity to light the dark. No roads, rails, or river barges allowed in or out. It is June 1948. Only 3 years after the fall of the Nazi regime, the very nations that dropped bombs on Berlin are now faced with an impossible choice. Abandon the city to starvation and Soviet control, or attempt the largest, most precarious air relief operation ever conceived. One that could trigger a Third World War at any second. Almost as soon as World War II ended, the question of what to do with a defeated, destroyed Germany threatened to drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies. At Potsdam in 1945, the Big Three, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, had agreed to divide Germany into occupation zones. The Soviets took the eastern half of the country, while the United States, Great Britain, and France divided up the west. But there was a geographical complication. The capital city of Berlin lay deep within East Germany, and it was partitioned in much the same way. 3 years later, the two sides found themselves increasingly at odds, and the future of West Berlin hung in the balance. The breaking point arrived over money. Outraged by the currency reform, introduced by the United States and Britain into their occupied zones of Germany, the Soviets retaliated. On June 24, 1948, they blocked all road, rail, and water routes to the Allied, controlled sectors of Berlin. Overnight, the blockade cut off the city's electricity, food, and coal supply, as well as its access to the outside world. West Berlin had become an isolated democratic island in the middle of a communist state. Neither the British nor the Americans wanted war with the Soviets. Yet they desperately wanted to maintain a Western presence in Berlin. In mid-June 1948, General Lucius Clay, of the administration of occupied Germany, reported his assessment to Washington. "We are convinced that our remaining in Berlin is essential to our prestige in Germany and in Europe. Whether for good or bad, it has become a symbol of the American intent." For the Allies, coming to the aid of West Berlin was non-negotiable. According to agreements made in 1945, the United States and Britain still had 3 air corridors to Berlin open to them. They made a fateful decision. They would airlift food, coal, and other crucial supplies into the city from Allied military air bases in Western Germany. The Allies reasoned that if the Soviets opposed the Berlin airlift with force, they would be acting aggressively against a humanitarian mission and violating an explicit agreement. Still, the danger of escalation was real. Though the United States hoped to resolve the crisis peacefully, President Harry S. Truman's administration sent B-29 bombers, capable of carrying nuclear weapons to Britain during the airlift, a stark indicator of just how serious the situation had become. On June 26, the United States launched Operation Vittles. Britain followed 2 days later, with Operation Plainfare. Early in the airlift, British and American planes struggled to carry the necessary amount of cargo to West Berlin. Sensing an advantage, the Soviets offered to lift the blockade, on the condition that the Allies withdraw the new Deutschmark from the city. The Allies refused. In the fall of 1948, the people of West Berlin made their own voices heard. Some 300,000 West Berliners gathered at the Reichstag to show their opposition to Soviet domination, helping to convince the Allies to continue the airlift. Though it began slowly, the airlift grew more and more efficient. Over 11 months, American and British pilots ferried some 2.3 million tons of supplies into West Berlin, on a total of 277,500 flights, in what would become the largest air relief operation in history. At its height, in the spring of 1949, an Allied aircraft landed at Berlin's Tempelhof Airport every 45 seconds. The planes carried everything from foodstuffs and medical supplies to coal and machinery, all vital to the survival of West Berliners, who were hungry, scared, and still reeling from the wounds inflicted during World War II. Amid the roar of cargo engines, moments of humanity stood out. One of the airlift's best known heroes, U.S. pilot Gail S. Halvorson, dropped parcels of candy, chewing gum, and other sweets for the city's children, earning the nickname Candy Bomber. As Hope Harrison, an associate professor of history and international affairs at George Washington University, explains, the airlift was a lifeline for West Berlin, to feel that the US and Great Britain, who had been their enemies, weren't giving up on them. The last time they were doing anything, they were dropping bombs, and instead they're bringing in food and coal and everything else. By the spring of 1949, it was clear that the Berlin Airlift had become a massive success. Meanwhile, an Allied counter-blockade stopping all rail traffic into East Germany from the US, and British zones had dried up the region's supply of coal and steel. This hampered East German industrial development, and left the Soviets worried about a political backlash. On May 12, 1949, after 11 long months, the Soviets ended the blockade of Allied, occupied Berlin. West Berliners welcomed the first British and American land convoys back into the city. The geopolitical landscape of Europe had transformed. A few weeks earlier, the Western Allies had met in Washington to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Just 2 weeks after the blockade was lifted, the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, was formally established. As Hope Harrison notes, Stalin got exactly the opposite of what he wanted. He was essentially, with the blockade, trying to stop the creation of a West German state. Well, he got the creation of a West German state and a Western military alliance. The shift in alliances extended across the West. Harrison observes that the airlift also convinced the French, who had initially taken a more vindictive stance toward the German people after the war ended. It took the blockade of Berlin to persuade the French. The new enemy is the Soviets. It's not the Germans anymore. It brought the French along with the US and Brits to say, look, we've now got to help the Germans, because we have a bigger enemy. In October 1949, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, was officially announced. 3 years later, Stalin's Soviet regime sealed the border between East and West Germany, leaving Berlin as the only conduit for East Germans looking to escape communism. Between 1949 and 1961, some 2.5 million of them fled via West Berlin, until in August 1961, the East German government erected the barbed wire fence that would become the Berlin Wall. The crisis over Berlin in 1948-49 had cemented the division of Europe into communist and anti-communist states. It also transformed the German capital, previously identified with Nazism and Hitler, into a Cold War-era symbol of democracy and freedom. For West Germans, the Berlin Airlift instilled an enduring sense of gratitude toward the United States and Britain, former enemies who had refused to allow them to be swallowed up into the communist regime, helping them when they needed it most. Decades later, long after the Cold War faded into memory, those ties remained. As Hope Harrison recalls, so many Berliners of that generation to this day have cans of food or powdered milk they kept as a souvenir of the airlift. After the terrorist attacks of 2001 on the United States, the city of Berlin took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, with pictures of the airlift. It said, "You helped us in our hour of need. We will help you now." History is often defined by the walls we build to divide us. But sometimes, it is defined by the lifelines we fly across the divide. If you want to understand more pivotal battles of the Cold War, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next episode.